Hi, my name is Dr. Rayshawn Ray, aiming to speak truth to power. This is my daily thought. The Department of Justice released another investigative report about policing in Baltimore. And what they found was similar to what they found in Ferguson, in Albuquerque, in Newark, and other cities, which is that police are using excessive force on African Americans and actually violating their civil rights via police brutality and the specific targeting of black residents. In fact, they found that a very high percentage of stops were occurring in two black neighborhoods in Baltimore. For example, one black man in his mid-50s was stopped over 30 times in a 4-year span. And what's interesting about that is that he was never charged with a crime, he was never arrested, and nothing was ever done. And see, these are the types of things that happen to black people that people don't oftentimes realize. They were also reported, officers reported that they were mandated to lock up individuals with black hoodies, right? So individuals who were black walking around with hoodies simply for having on a particular type of clothing. In a few instances, individuals were arrested for exercising their First Amendment right to freedom of speech. And what's interesting is that there were even officers who listed a person's mouth as their weapon, right? This is what happens to black people that, in many respects, although supposedly we have progressed from say 1916 to 2016, in many respects, individuals' experiences are basically exactly the same, right? So we see the ways that blackness plays out in terms of the way that people are targeted. And this doesn't mean that blacks weren't trying to file complaints. From 2000 to 2015, blacks in Baltimore filed roughly 5,000 complaints. Out of those complaints, only 10 were investigated, and only in one instance was an officer charged. Now, at the end of the day, everyone should know that police bias exists, right? That racial bias exists in policing as well as in other social institutions. But there are people who actually deny this fact. The cognitive dissonance is on overload. And even though there are some white people and black people who believe this, the reasons why they believe it are different, even if their outcome, meaning both groups actually believe that bias isn't actually occurring and that individuals are actually doing something to actually cause this, but the reasons for this is different. For whites, oftentimes what happens, there are some individuals who just believe in colorblind racism. They just think that racism doesn't exist, and if someone is doing something or if someone got in trouble, then they must have done something. The other part that happens with whites is that they have such positive interactions with police officers overall, whether that be relatives, whether that be people who live in their neighborhood, go to their church. The fact that these people could actually treat people so badly simply is just beyond belief, right? And so that's one part of it. The other part of it is that there are some whites who come in contact with affluent blacks, and they're trying to make sense of the fact if racism exists, how do you exist? Well, this should actually tell you, in line with the Black Girl Magic hashtag, oftentimes just what black people have overcome if they are actually still in the same place that you are. They're experiencing these same things in public space, in the social institutions that you're in, but they have been able to overcome these things. And these individuals aren't necessarily just tokenized exceptions, right? It isn't one of those situations where simply because these people have succeeded, other people have succeeded. No, instead, think about potentially how far these individuals will be. So there was a study that came out showing that blacks have been oppressed for 400 years, and it will take them another 228 years if equality is met to actually reach parity with whites as it relates to wealth, right? So these are the sorts of things we're talking about. For blacks, on the other hand, what's happening with some African Americans who actually don't want to admit that police brutality is so prominent? If, for the most part, blacks who have achieved a certain level of socioeconomic status, if they actually admit that police brutality occurs, if they actually admit that there's a possibility that they might actually be stopped for no reason, harassed, roughed up, even potentially killed, and that there is nothing they can do about it in a society, in a supposed democratic society, where you're supposed to pull yourselves up from your bootstraps and exhibit a certain locus of control, if they admit that they no longer have control in that moment, then that's something that they actually won't be able to deal with cognitively and psychologically and emotionally. It will harm their self-esteem. It's what we call social psychologically. They will actually exhibit lower levels of not only self-esteem but also relative deprivation and reflected appraisals, where they compare themselves to others disfavorably. This is something that there are some blacks who actually don't want to admit this, right? It is actually something that would fracture them, that would harm them. So, in short, even though you have some blacks and whites who actually exhibit cognitive dissonance as to why police brutality exists at such a high rate, they actually don't want to admit that. Even though the outcome is the same, the reasoning for that is completely different, right? And we always have to be clear about the mechanism and the outcome and the ways that race might diverge individuals as it relates to their attitudes and their perceptions. So hopefully this spurs a conversation because conversations matter like Black Lives in Books. And this is my daily thought.